Right, so today we're talking about the02R, which is Yamaha's digital mixing console. Now, this is it's a digital mixing console, and what it's really famous for is its flexibility. So it's really used a lot in broadcast and like live performances and like on stage for like musicals and stuff like that. So that you can be really flexible if you need to change scenes, if you need to cut microphones on and off, stuff like that. It's really, really useful for that. In a studio, it's very useful for saving your mixes really easily. So instead of having to go through and take a picture of everything and then redial it in and zero out the board at the end of your session, you can just recall what they call scenes, which are just presets for the whole entire board. And you can recall those and you can have it go to a song that you were working on, or you can have it zero out the board or something like that. And that's what really the02R brings to the table. It's not really, it's a digital console. It's not like a Neve or an SSL where it's bringing like a certain sound to the table. The02R is just a very clean board. It's just a very kind of digital sound, which is just clean, which is great, but it's not something that people say like, oh yeah, the sound of the02R is amazing. You're never going to hear people talk about the sound of the02R. They're going to talk about the flexibility of the02R and the ease of use of the02R, like what it allows you to do. The best way that I think that you should look and think about the02R is as a computer with a mixing console. It's just like your iPad or your computer or something like that, and it's just in the frame of a mixing console. So if you're kind of getting stuck and how to think about it, if it's like too many buttons or too many menus and stuff like that, or like concepts or whatever, just kind of stop and think like, okay, it's just like a computer. So you really have to think about it as a computer. And some of the things that we will be talking about are very computery because it is essentially a computer that is a mixing console. And once I kind of started thinking about it like that, it made it a little bit easier for me to wrap my head around it. Now, I started using the02R back in 1997 when I went to school in London. They had one at that school, and the console itself is from like 1996. It's a very old console, and it's pretty rare that you're going to see one out in the world today. What you're going to see is more modern counterparts and other digital mixing consoles. And we do have a couple of those at SAE that you're going to be working with later on. We have the Behringer X32, which is it's like a very low cost digital mixing console, which is why you're going to see it out in a lot of like live venues and stuff like that. And then we also have the Presonus, which I think you can get time on. And then we have the S1, which is not a digital mixing console, but it is a digital mix controller, which is very similar. And you're going to see that things that you learn here with the02R do carry over into other digital mixing consoles. It's just like with anything else. Once you learn the concepts, you'll be able to apply those concepts to many different places. So it's something that you really need to think about, and don't worry, even if you never see an O2R for the rest of your life, the concepts that you're learning now will carry over into other applications. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So this is the O2R right here. We're looking at the like an overview of the O2R here, and just some broad strokes here across the top. We've got the your meter board. You can see your meters here, and then you've got your input section here where you've got your gain, input, and stuff like that. Down the side over here is your master section over here, like if we're comparing it to the audio, which we learned a couple weeks ago. Here's your monitor section where you can choose what you're listening to, and your level here. And then down here you've got some like navigation stuff, so you can navigate around on the screen right here. And then across the bottom is all your channels. Now, you've got 24 faders here, but this board actually allows for 56 channels. And I'm going to explain in depth how you can access all those different channels. Over here is your master fader right here. This is the one you're just going to turn up to 0 and just leave it at 0. And then over here, you've got a display access, which kind of controls what you're looking at on this display here, and some other buttons here that control like aux channels and like what different buttons on here do. And then over here, you've got the selected channel section, and this basically is where you can control an EQ and a compressor and your routing and pan for every single channel on here. So remember, I said there's 56 channels in this mixer, and for every single channel, you've got a compressor, you've got an EQ, you've got panning, and you've got routing that you can adjust. And that's all done right up here in the selected channel area. So one thing you'll notice immediately is that there's not nearly as many knobs as there are on the Audient. The Audient has every single channel strip has your knobs for your EQs, it's got knobs for aux sends, it's got your short fader, it's got your long fader, all that stuff. But on here, we only have one section that kind of controls the parameters for every single channel. So it doesn't have one EQ knob for channel 1, for channel 2, for channel 3, channel 4, channel 5. For every single one, you don't have individual EQ knobs for it. What you're going to do is you're going to select the channel that you want to affect, that you want to adjust the parameters on, and that channel is going to pop up here on the menu on your screen here, and then you're going to control the knobs right over here on the right hand side. And as I said, as we get deeper into this, we're going to talk more and more about that. This is just kind of an overview of what's going on, just a really, really broad overview. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go over here into the introduction, and we're going to just like kind of recap a little bit about what I just talked about with notes. Okay, so this is our digital console. The biggest parts about it is just the flexible routing. It allows you to save and recall the overall console settings. Those are called scenes. Where you can get to your scenes is right over here. Right there. See where it says scene memory? It's a little bit hard to see because this picture is like, it gets a little bit grainy when I blow it up big. But you can see right here it says scene memory, and that's where we can recall our different scenes. Oops, wrong one. This one. There we go. You have onboard effects like reverbs, delays, choruses, distortions, all that sorts of stuff, compressors, all that things. And you can also save presets for those. So that's pretty cool. It's every channel. When I save the scene for the whole board, it's saving your effects, it's saving your EQs, it's saving your compression settings, all that stuff, and it all gets recalled back. Exactly like Pro Tools. Think about it like you're doing, it's like a hardware version of Pro Tools. Kind of. It's like a hardware version of Pro Tools. The only difference is you're not recording stuff into the O2R itself. You have to have something else that will record stuff. But once you get that going, you're going through the O2R, and you can even do automation on the O2R if you want to. It does have motorized faders. So motorized faders, that means that when you move a fader, you can also have it move automatically for you to another position. So that's pretty cool. And it means that when I'm changing my settings for stuff, these faders here will represent exactly what the settings are. And this people always get really excited about this. When you see it happen, when you change the scene or you move something and it goes, everything moves automatically. People get really excited about that. It's fun to watch, especially the first time you do it. It's a pretty neat thing to see. So those are motorized faders on there. And the motorized faders on this board are really high quality. Yamaha makes a whole bunch of stuff other than mixing consoles, and they use that technology in everything else. So the motorized faders on here are very, very high quality, and they're very reliable. They can be paired together into stereo pairs, and they can also be grouped together into multiple groups, just like in Pro Tools where you have those Pro Tools groups where you move one and it moves several. You can do that on here as well, where you move one fader and it moves a bunch of other faders as well, and you can group those together. The easiest thing though is just to pair them together, which we're going to talk about how to do that later on. The default I/O of the O2R is 16 XLR inputs and 24 line inputs, and those overlap. So you have a total of 24 inputs. 16 of those are XLR with microphone preamps, and then all 24 of them also have a line input. This can be expanded up to more inputs if you want, or more outputs, something like that. And then it has 24 direct outs. So those 24 inputs can go straight out into a recording device, and that's how you would record. It has a clean sound, but it's sterile and boring. It's just, and when I say boring, I don't mean like, wow, I hate my life type of boring. It's just like, it's not really special. As I said before, there's nothing like, except that it's clean, there's nothing really amazing about the sound of it. It's not like, you know, some kind of preamp or something where you get it because the sound, like you know, Universal Audio 610 and you can overdrive it or something like that. It's not like that. It's just got a very digital sound. All right, so this part here, we're going to go back into, like, more in depth into this broad strokes that I just told you about. And you can see here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all that stuff. It's all down here. So we're just going to go through this piece by piece. I'm going to zoom in on this. There we go. And we're going to talk about this piece by piece. And these numbers correspond to things in your notes as well. So you can go into your notes and you can see what's going on with this. So we have here our meter bridge. And the meter bridge has a couple of input metering positions, pre-EQ, pre-fader, and post-fader. Depending on what you're doing, if you're like level setting and checking out your levels for recording and stuff like that, you're going to set these differently. If I'm doing my mixing, I want it to be set for post-fader. But if I'm doing my input level check to make sure I'm not clipping my input or distorting stuff, then it's going to be pre-EQ. You also have a peak hold button here. So when you, yes, Mickey, it's very transparent. Peak hold button here. This is going to allow it to hold the peaks so you can see if things are clipping the input. Now, I say clipping the input here because it is a digital board. Remember we had that discussion the other day in class last week talking about distortion versus clipping. We were talking about it last week on Twitch, and somebody was talking about distortion versus clipping. And we're using the word clipping here because this is a digital board. Just like with a computer, when you peak, it doesn't distort, it clips. So it's not like a pleasant sound. It's like, ooh, that's a nice sound. I'm going to drive that a little bit harder. It's actually a clipping sound. It's like a type of sound. So you have to be aware of that. This is a digital board. There's no, like, it doesn't sound good when you overdrive it. It just sounds like digital crap, really. Okay, and then over here we have our different layer selects, and we're going to come back and talk about that. But you can actually independently select your different layers from the main board and your meters. So you can actually be looking at something in your meters separate from what you're actually looking at in your main board. I know that sounds confusing, but it actually comes in quite handy later on. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got our main stereo meter right here, and then we can push this button so we can see what our control room's doing versus our stereo out. And then over here we've got our bus meters as well, so we can see what our buses are doing. And there's also an output metering position that's pre-EQ, pre-fader, and post-fader. That's very similar to this one over here on this side. Most of the time you're going to be paying attention to these over here and the buses when you are busing things, but we haven't really talked about busing so much, so we will come back and kind of talk about busing on the O2R once we're getting deeper into it. Number 2 here, this part here, is our AD input pod. So this part here is analog to digital conversion, and it's got our gain, and you've got your phantom power, you've got your peak pad here, so you can pad it down if you need to, and then down here you've got your insert. You can put an insert into each one. So what the pad does is the pad just is like, if it's something that's like super loud, like a snare drum or a guitar, and it's just coming into the board too hot, even when your gain is all the way down, you can push this pad button here and it brings it down by, I believe it's 26 dB, and then you can adjust your gain more effectively there. So it's just, a pad is for really, really loud sounds, and that's probably a review from Mod 1. You probably learned about that in Mod 1. Then we have our 48 volt, which of course is for phantom power, and you can see that each of these 16 channels here has a phantom power, so you can adjust your phantom power case by case. And then you've got your gain knob for all 16 of these here, and then you've got your insert here, and insert is if you want to put in like a compressor or an EQ into the line that's like an external, like let's say you have got an external compressor, or you've got an external EQ or something like that, you can have that in here for recording purposes. So this here, these 16 are your XLR inputs. They can also be your line inputs. And the way that the O2R works, here, let me just go over here to the back panel. Here's what the back panel looks like. And we can see that each of these 16 here has 3 different slots in the back, 3 different holes. You've got your XLR, you've got your line, And then down here you've got your insert, and the insert is just one input here, but it's actually remember we talked about TRS, right? And TRS allows us to split the signal into an input and an output, and that's what's going on here. This is a TRS input and allows us to split that insert signal. So you have on the one end it's TRS, and on the other end it splits to two mono cables, just two TS signals, and that can be input and output. So here, if we have a cable plugged into the XLR, and then we plug in a cable into the 1/4 inch input, it's going to bypass the XLR input here. And that's something that you'll see on the Mackie 1604. A lot of boards are like this, where if you have something plugged into the XLR and then you plug in something to the line, it actually bypasses the XLR. And that's how this Yamaha board is as well. So you cannot really have cables plugged into both the 1/4 inch and the XLR at the same time. It's going to be one or the other up here. And if we go look over here on the other side to these last 8 inputs, these last 8 inputs are just 1/4 inch only. And that's what I meant by when I was talking about that the board is 16 XLR inputs by default. That's these right here. So at SAE in New York, the way we have our console set up is we have 16 inputs, and that's it. Channels 17 through 24 are set for our monitor path. They're not set for our input path. And you can change all that stuff in the internals of the board. Now, I did say a couple times the default setup, and the reason why I said that is because you can see down here there's actually 4 card slots, and if we just look at this, these card slots here allow us to have additional inputs or outputs. They allow us to have additional inputs or outputs on the back of the board. So if I needed to have 8 more inputs, I can have 8 more inputs. Or if I needed to have some digital inputs, I can have some digital inputs. This here is the AES EBU digital I/O card. So this allows me to have more inputs and outputs that are digital. This one here is analog, so this allows me to have more analog inputs. This one here is analog output, allows me to have more outputs. So you can buy different cards for the back of this board. So depending on what your situation is, what your usage is, you can tailor make your O2R for that purpose. And that's something you'll find with a lot of these digital consoles, is that a lot of them do have expandable capabilities, and you can a variety of capabilities. So that's when I keep saying the default setting is for or the default out of the box. That's what I'm talking about. Just if you don't add any cards into it, you're just going to get 16 XLRs and or 24 line. Okay, great. So just to make sure that we're all clear about that. Awesome. Okay, so let's go over here to this section here, and that's number 2 here. We're still talking about number 2 here, and these gains right here are for the line inputs 17 through 24. So you notice there's no phantom power, there's no insert, there's no pad. That's because these here are for if you were going to bring in keyboards or something like that, that's what these really would be for. Okay, moving right along. Up here up top, we have the Talkback level, and there's a little built-in microphone. If you've been into the Audient board, then you'll remember that the Audient has a microphone that actually sticks up on the top of it. This one does not. This one has a microphone that's built right into the board itself. Then we also have a studio level and a headphone level. So you got to make sure if you're sending signal out to your studio, you've got to make sure you turn this up, which is for headphones, for the studio headphones, you're going to have to make sure you turn that up. So this is a really important knob right here that you have to have turned up, and also the talkback level is important as well. The headphones level here is for this one right here. If you are using headphones in the studio for some reason, then you would turn that up. But realistically at SAE, you're not going to be using headphones in the studio. You will be using headphones if you you'll be using not SAE, you won't be using headphones in the control room. You'll be using them in the studio, but that's not really connected up to anything. This is if you had this at home and you needed to do work late at night, I guess, And I do know people who had this at home. All right, part number 3 here is the monitor. And this is the monitor section. It includes all this stuff down here. Let me just back that out one more time. There we go. So we can see this whole little section here is all the monitor section, but it's different parts of what we're dealing with monitor-wise. So if we look at this, up top it says studio. This is what you're sending to your studio. Remember this knob right here above at the studio level? Well, that's controlled with this here. So if we want to send our control room signal, what we are hearing in the control room, to the studio, we can push that button right there. If we want to send our stereo output, what we would be recording, then we can send that here from the stereo out. If we wanted to send a headphone mix out, we can use Aux 7 and Aux 8 to send out a headphone mix. So we can route, remember in the Audient we had the foldback mix A and B. Well, we're going to use, the way we have it set up at SAE in New York is we have foldback A and B is kind of like set up for Aux 7 and Aux 8. So one person could be on Aux number 7 and one person could be on Aux number 8, getting their headphone signal from each of those. And I'm going to show you how to set that up. We have a solo clear button, and this is a really useful button for if you've got a few different tracks soloed because you've been working on like little sub mixes and stuff like that. You can just hit that button right there and it just clears all the solos out, so everything will be heard. Down here we have control room. This control room section here is what you are listening to in the control room. You, the engineer, what you're listening to is shown with this part right here. 90% of the time it's going to be set for stereo right here. This is the normal setting for this, stereo. But if you wanted to hear what you're sending to Aux 7 and Aux 8, you could push assignment 1 and assignment 2. That would let you hear what you're sending to Aux 7 and Aux 8. If you're doing a recording onto a digital 2-track or an analog 2-track, like some kind of a recording device, and you want to hear that, then you can push one of these buttons here. 2-track, digital 1, digital 2, digital 3, and analog 1 and analog 2. It's got a couple of different settings for stuff. You may or may not ever use this. If you are doing if you're doing a recording into a 2-track, you might bring your own laptop in, or you might bring in, you might record straight into Pro Tools, and in which case you may or may not ever use this here at SAE, but that's how it's used, and we are going to talk about how to do that. Down here, there's a surround sound button for, you can choose where your surround sound is being sent, from the buses or from the slot if you have a surround sound card. We're never going to use that at SAE in New York because we do not have our surround sound set up in that room. For us, the surround sound is set up in the S1 room. So there is surround sound. You are going to be learning about surround sound. You are going to be mixing surround sound, but not in the O2R. That means that this surround sound monitor level is never going to be used. But you are going to use this control room level right here. This white knob here is for the control room level. That's where you adjust the volume of what you're listening to. How loud is it? How loud are you hearing it? That's going to be right here in control room level. Then you've got your buttons for dimmer and talkback. Dimmer is when you want to dim the signal so you can just hear it at a like, you know, if you want to talk over it or something like that, and you just want to hear that it's playing, but you don't need to pay attention to it, you can use that. And then you can also use the talkback button here for when you need to talk to the recording artist. So that's what's going on there. Number 4 here is our machine control, and this is something that we're gonna talk about more in Mod 3 when we talk about like using these as control devices. But realistically, we're not going to use it too much in Mod 2 because there's so much other stuff to talk about. We just don't really have time to get into this. But if you wanted to connect this up to Pro Tools or Logic or something like that and have it be able to control Pro Tools or Logic, be able to push play and stop and rewind and fast forward and record and all that stuff, you can do that right here. You can also set it so these faders on here will control your DAW. So if you wanted to control, like have this be a mixer for your DAW, you can have it set up to do that. And that's this remote layer right here. See number 7, how it says remote? That's what that's for. The remote layer allows you to control your DAW. Okay, down here, number 5. This is our navigation area, and it's also got our little, our kind of input wheel here for data entry. So if I'm going to navigate, and what I'm talking about when I say navigate, is this screen right here. You're going to navigate around this screen. That's what these little arrow keys do. They kind of move your cursor around the menu up here on the screen. Whatever you're looking at on the screen, we can navigate around it with these little buttons down here. And if you look, there's little increase and decrease buttons here. And these increase and decrease buttons, they allow us to like increase or decrease like data. Okay, so we can use those buttons to kind of go up or down by 1. You can also use the jog wheel here to scroll through things. So that's what that's for. It's like the scroll wheel on your mouse, that little middle scroll wheel on your mouse. That's what this is for here. Then we have an enter key here. That is an enter key. It's just like the return key on your computer. So when you want to select something, you hit that enter key. This little area, number 5, is going to become one of your best friends on the O2R board. Number 6 is your master fader. And you can see there's a couple things. There's automation, there's select, there's on, all this stuff, but then there's your fader. The most important part about this is really this fader. Whenever you zero out the board, the fader is going to come all the way down. Whenever you come back into the studio, that fader is going to go right up to 0 and you're just going to leave it there. Do not mess with the fader. Don't touch it. You don't need to mess around with it. You can just set it right up there to do all that. Cool. All right. Number 7, this is our layer area. This is like super, super important. And actually what I'm going to do here is we're going to pause for a second because everything so far has been like pretty, like you can kind of imagine in your head. It's stuff we've talked about with the audience, but this layer section is really, really different. And I want to go over here and consult our notes so we can read it as I'm listening to me talk about it. So the O2R has 4 layers that select what the channel strips control. So these channel strips here, there's only 24 of them, right? But we have to be able to control all 56 channels on the board. And that's what the layers do. The layers allow us to control different things with this one channel strip. So there's 4 buttons on here. Layer 1 through 24 controls channels 1 through 24, pretty self-explanatory. Layer 25 through 48 controls channels 25 through 48, also very self-explanatory. Then the master layer controls channels 49 through 56 and your aux masters and your buses. So there are 8 auxes on here and there's 8 buses. And those masters, remember in the upper right hand corner of the audient, you have the aux master sends. We talked about that, and you also have the bus master sense, that bus output. Well, that's what's going on here. So if you want to control those or send something out externally or whatever, then you can use those. But they're up by default. They're just automatically up by default, so you shouldn't have any problems there. But then we also have channels 49 through 56, and you're going to see that we have a special use for 49 through 56. So really, for usable channels on the O2R, you've got channels 1 through 24 and 25 through 48. And that's what we've got there. And it's actually, they're set up so if we go back here and look, let me zoom in on this again, all the way down to the bottom, we can see that in white numbers across the bottom it says 1 all the way over here to 24, right? And you can see that's there. But directly beneath it, you can see there's gray numbers. This first one here says 25 through 48, and then beneath it, it says 49 through 56, and then it says aux 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like that. So this is just so you can get your bearings on what's going on here. So it kind of tells you, okay, we're on channel 1, we're on channel 9, we're on channel 17, we're on channel 25, we're on channel 33, we're on channel 41, we're on channel 49, we're on channel aux 1, we're on bus 1, something like that. So it really enables you to kind of see what you're doing there. These do not illuminate or anything like that. They just have to kind of know what you're doing with it. What does illuminate is over here in our layer section has little lights on each of the buttons. So whatever light is lit up, that's what layer you're on. And this can get really confusing. This is like the main part that people have troubles with the O2R when they are saying, you know what, I want to turn up my channel 15. And they're turning up the fader for 15 right here, 15. But you can see that that one fader can also control channel 39, or it could control aux 7. And that all depends on what light is illuminated over here. So channel 15, this channel strip here for number 15 could also be 39. So if you say, I want to turn up channel number 15, if I want to turn up the input for channel number 15, but you have layer 25 through 48 selected, you're actually turning up 39. And that's the confusing part about this board, is that really you have to pay attention. So if you're the type of person who you're just like moving really quick all the time and you're skipping steps and you're just kind of going ahead and moving really fast and you're not paying much attention to stuff, you're gonna have problems with the O2R. The O2R is going to slow you down. You have to slow down with this board, especially in the beginning, until you really learn it, until you get it into your head and you've got it going on. You need to like just slow down, take a breath, and pay attention to what you're doing, okay? And you'll see that, because what'll happen is you'll be moving that fader up and down and nothing will happen. You'll be like, why am I not hearing anything? Well, the reason why you're not hearing anything is because you're probably on the wrong layer. That's a really big point to keep in mind. The layers do get a little bit tricky. They're not super hard to understand. It's just when you're actually using it in practice, those layers, you'll forget to look at your layers. And I've done it a lot. I'm the type of person where I move pretty quick. And sometimes I'll be like, why am I not hearing anything? I'm like turning it up and down. Why am I not hearing anything? Oh, because my layer select is the wrong layer. So then I have to like, okay, wait, what was it set at? Because I need to make sure it's set for the right one. Okay, so that's what your 4 layers do. Let me go ahead and, oh, and sorry, there's the remote layer as well. So control your DAW. Now, let me go ahead and check out, let's go look at this other PDF here, because this other PDF does explain layers really, really well. Where is it? This one, I believe. No, this one. This one, yeah. And we're going to come back and take a look at some of these things, but I just want to skip ahead real quick to look at the layers. Is it in here? Wait, where are we? I may have passed it, actually. Let's go back this way. Selected channel, AD input, routing. Nope, it's at the end. Okay, I always forget where they. Okay, here we go. I saw it. There we go. Layers. Yeah. So this is like a nice little kind of diagram of how these layers are set up, and you do have this PowerPoint in the canvas that you can download. So I highly recommend that you download this. But here we've got this, the layer here, 1 through 24, 25 through 48, remote and master. That's what our layer button looks like. And then over here we can see what it's kind of doing here. So if you put layer 1 through 24, it's going to be like this one here, and then 25 through 48, it's like this one here, and then master layer is here, and then remote layer is like this. So this is what this is set up like. 1 through 24 controls input channels 1 through 24. 25 through 48 controls input channels 25 through 48. And the master controls input channels 49 through 56, and your aux sends masters and your bus out masters. And then remote is depends on what your target is for like Pro Tools or Logic or something like that. So this is, you've got all these different inputs here, but we have a way that we have it set up at SAE that kind of makes sense. And let me just tell you that in just a second. So at SAE in New York, I should say, yep, here we go. At SAE in New York, we have it set up like this, right here. We have our input path, we have our monitor path, and then we've got our effects returns for all these channels here. So our input path, we have 16 channels for the input path. That's 1 through 16. We do not have 24 channels for the input path because of those 8 line inputs. We're using them for something different, and I'm going to explain that in just a second. But the input path here is 1 through 16. The monitor path is 25 through 48, and there's 17 through 24, those inputs on the back that I showed you earlier, those are going here to 24 through 48, and that's why we're not using them on the input path. So just keep in your head that the O2R has 16 inputs for our purposes, for recording. Then if we were mixing, we can actually mix 24 channels. That's channels 25 through 48 on here. Okay, so that input path is layer 1 through 24. Layer 1 through 24 is the input path. Layer 25 through 48, that's the monitor path. And if you kind of think of it like that, it does make things a little bit easier, at least it did for me. So I just always keep in mind, layer 1 through 24 is the input path, and layer 25 through 48 is the monitor path. Then we have our effects returns set up into our master layer here, 49 through 56. So the effects returns are coming back to channels on the board. Remember, on the Audient, we had those 4 stereo inputs. Well, the O2R doesn't have 4 stereo inputs that you can set up like this. What we have for our effects returns is 49 through 56. And this effects returns, what I mean when I say effects returns, is our internal effects. Because remember, we have 4 built-in digital effects, which we're going to come back and talk about in detail in a minute. But the effects returns for those internal digital effects are channels 49 through 56. And then we have our aux masters, which usually you don't have to touch because they're just set to 0. And then our bus masters, again, where you're not going to be touching too much unless you are doing subgroup mixing. Okay, so that's how this is all set up right there. It's really essentially for you just have to think about the 3 different things. For now, for mod 2, we have to think about 3 different things: the input path, the monitor path, and the master layer, which has our effects returns on it. Okay, so layer 1 through 24 is the input path, layer 25 through 48 is the monitor path, and then our effects returns for our internal effects is 49 through 56, like that. Okay, and so let's just go back here and take a look at this. Cool. Where are we? Right back here. Okay, so let's just keep going with this. That's our layers. Okay. Now, for each one of these here, 17 through 24, or sorry, not 17, 1 through 24, each one of these channels here, you're going to see here we've got a couple things. For every single one has the same buttons and knobs on it and stuff like that. So every single one has our encoder knob here. We've got an auto button, we've got a select button, a solo button, and an on button. Okay, so they all have the same things like this. You've got the encoder knob. The encoder knob is lets you control either the panning or it lets you control your aux send amount. Okay, and you can adjust what it's doing at another place on the board. Then we have an automation button here. If you want to record automation onto something, you can do that. We're not really going to dive into that in mod 2. That's a little bit beyond the scope of mod 2, but it is a possibility. Then you have the select button here. Now the select button here is connected to this part right here. See where it says selected channel? Well, how do you select the channel? You push the button for the channel you want to select. So we actually have to push 2 different buttons, or at least make sure that 2 buttons are enabled. And that's the layer button and the select button for each channel. So the layer button here, we have to make sure if we're going to be on our input path, we're going to push layer 1 through 24. If we're going to be on our monitor path, doing some EQ to our monitor path, then it's going to be 25 through 48. We push that button and then we make sure we select the channel that we want to apply the EQ to, and then we apply the EQ up here. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but that's what all these mean. And then we have here, number 8 is all this stuff in general. Number 11A is right here, our encoder knob, and that actually connects up to this encoder mode right over here, which we're going to come back and talk about in just a second. Number 9 here is our display access, and the display access really is what we're looking at on our screen here. Now I want you to notice something. The display access buttons here are these little diamond shaped buttons. They're like kind of set up like a square on its side, like a baseball field. They have other buttons on here that are actual regular squares. Well, the shape and the color matter. So these regular squares, what these do is these select something on the display. But this here actually changes the display itself. So anytime you see a little gray diamond button like these over here, let me pull that in a little bit better. There we go. So anytime we see a gray diamond button like this, or these over here, this one, this one, this one, these, what they do is they actually change what we're looking at on the screen here. This is not a touch screen. It's just a regular screen. You can't touch it. I mean, you can touch it. It's not going to do anything. And these diamond buttons change what we're looking at on the screen. So they allow us to navigate to different parts in the program. If we think about this as a computer, they're going to allow us to navigate to different parts within the computer program, different menus. Then if we want to select something on the screen or adjust something, it's going to be one of these other buttons here. So if I want to turn on my routing, I would choose one of these buttons here. If I wanted to change my encoder mode or something like that, I'm going to choose one of these things here. But if I want to see my encoders, what my encoders are currently doing or what their settings are, I'm going to push the display button right here. So that really helped me to understand navigating the console when I was first learning the console. And like I said, I learned about this thing in 1997, and this really helped me out. I was really young back then, and I was just learning about all this stuff, and it was a lot to take in, but understanding that right there really helped me to kind of demystify things a little bit. So the display access, there's a lot of different things in here. We're going to talk about a couple of them, but not everything by any means, because a lot of the stuff in here you don't really need to go into detail right now. The main important factor for me is that, do you know how to record stuff with the O2R, and do you know how to mix stuff with the O2R? Here we have our Aux Select section here. The Aux Select allows us to select one of our 8 aux channels. So, and we can use these auxes for internal effects, or we can use them for external things. Remember earlier I said aux 7 and 8 are used for our headphone mixes, just like the foldback on the Audient. So that's right here. So if you want to send a signal to aux 7 and 8, you're going to select aux 7 or aux 8. Now this works in conjunction with the encoders or the faders. And that's all down here. The encoders are up top and the faders are down here. The main way that I use my encoders is set for pan mode right here. And we can choose what those encoders are doing by choosing a different mode right here. Pan, aux, assign 1, assign 2, like that. So for pan mode, that means that my encoder is going to actually adjust the panning left or right for that channel. The aux mode is going to be my aux send amount. Remember on the Audient how the Audient has a little knob for the aux send? Well, that's what this is here. This encoder mode can also be that aux send. But if you want to use the encoder mode as an aux send, you have to push that aux button right there. Then we also have assignment 1 and 2 for just like assignment things that you want to assign it to. So for example, if you had like, if you had like a filter on here or something like that, and you wanted to assign it to your cutoff on your filter, you could also do that in here, although that's not something we're really going to be dealing with much here in Mod 2. Then you have your fader mode here, and the fader mode controls what the fader is doing. There's 2 modes for the fader. We can see here, fader or aux. So if it's set for fader mode, the fader is set for fader mode, that's just going to control your volume level for that channel. If the fader is set for aux send amount, the aux mode, that's going to be your send amount for that channel. And that's actually how I like to use it. I like to set my auxes from my faders. So what I'll do is when it's time to send stuff to reverb or whatever, I'll push that fader mode aux button right here. I'll push the aux button and all the faders will go, they'll all go down like that. And then I'll push it up to send that channel to my reverb or my delay, something like that, some kind of send effect. And then once I'm done doing that, I'll push that fader mode again and they'll kind of like jump back to their original positions, and that's showing me my volume levels. It's the first couple times you do it, it might be a little bit tricky, but it's actually not that hard. So it's not something that you need to, don't stress about it if you're kind of a little bit lost right now. Don't stress it. Once you do it, you'll be like, oh, that's actually pretty easy. Okay. Then we have number 13 here, and 13 is for our effects or plugins. We have internal effects, plugins, and channel inserts. And then down here we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the reason why we have 4 is because there are 4 internal digital effects on board this thing. So and any one of them can be reverbs or delays, and they can be other stuff as well, like choruses or distortions or phasers, all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of effects in here that you can use, and I recommend that you go through the library and check them out. There's a whole bunch of presets for each one, so you can choose different things, just like with Pro Tools. Exactly with Pro Tools, and Pro Tools you've got all the effects that you can use, all those plugins. Same thing with this, you have effects plugins, and just like in Pro Tools there's presets, same thing with this, there's presets. Remember last week we talked about the presets on each one. There's like this, you know, for my EQ, it's like a setting that says extra thump or extra vocal or extra presence, or, you know, take out the whatevers or subtract hum or something like that. Well, for this, it has the same thing. Each plugin has a whole bunch of, has a library of presets for it as well, which is pretty cool, especially if you're just kind of getting started with music production and engineering and stuff like that, and you're kind of like a little bit fuzzy on stuff. You can go through and recall your presets, which I highly recommend. Then we have number 13. And number 14 rather. Number 14 is just the display. It's just this display right here. Like I said, it's not a touch display. If you touch it, you're going to be sad. And then we've got, this is like a little kind of like a tinting thing where it kind of adjusts the kind of contrast of the whole thing so you can see it a little bit better or worse, depending on what angle you're at. Then down here we have a couple of like buttons for navigation or adjustment here. There's 4 encoder knobs here that control things on here, and they're going to be highlighted what it will control. And you've got F1, F2, F3, F4. These are for tabs across the bottom, and it's a little bit hard to see on this window. Let me just see if I can pull it up a little bit better on this one here. I think this one has, yeah, this one has a little bit better, more contrast going on the screen. See how this one says effects? It's hard to see what it says, but it says, trust me, it says effects edit, and this one says effects library, and this one says something else, and this one says something edit. I can't exactly see what that says. But these here are different tabs that will have different, basically different windows on each tab. So if I wanted to go to this number tab here, which is selected right now, I push the F1 key. If I want to go to this effects library, I'm going to push F2. If I want to go to this, whatever this is, I'm going to push F3, and this one here is F4. Now, also you can see how this has, these ones are darker? That's the ones that you can control with these knobs right here. So I can use these up and down arrows here to go up and down here, and it's going to go across the 4 that I can control right there. So it's really nice because you can just sit there and you can control everything. One of the things I love about this board is that it's really hands-on with stuff. I have discovered that I'm really into hands-on more than using my mouse. I like the mouse. I use the mouse all the time. The mouse is okay, but and I mostly use the mouse because I have to use the mouse. But if I have my preference, I actually prefer to use knobs and stuff like that. So that is what's going on there. Let's go back over here. Number 15. There is 15 is divided up further into sections, and we're just going to talk about these sections real quick here. 15 is for your selected channel. So whatever channel I've got selected down here with my layer and my channel, that's what I'm controlling up here. A is the routing for the channel. That's kind of like the routing matrix on the Audient. It's going to select if we go out to different outputs or something like that, or buses. Now, the one thing that is different with this though is that each channel on the O2R has a direct out, and those direct outs are for recording, and it's just 1-to-1. So with the routing matrix on the Audient, I can come into channel 1, but I can go out of channel 5 if I needed to for some reason. On here, you cannot do that. On here, the O2R, you come into channel 1, you go out of channel 1. It's called a direct out. And this is the more kind of common way that most, $1,500 to $10,000 boards kind of work, or I should say $5,000 boards, I guess. So they have like direct outs. So on here, routing 1 through 8, and then we have a stereo button and a direct button and the follow pan button. So stereo and direct, and then 1 through 8 here. So the stereo button is going to be pressed most of the time. That's so you can hear it through your stereo mix. The only time you're not going to press the stereo button is if you're going for a routing here, or that's one of our 8 buses, or if you're going through a direct out if you're recording the signal. So if you're coming in on the input path, which is layer 1 through 24, then you're probably not going to have the stereo button pressed. You're probably going to have that direct button pressed. But if you're coming in on the monitor path, which is 48 through 25 through 48, then you are going to have that stereo button pressed, or you're going to have one of these routing bus numbers pressed. And then you get your display access here. for the selected channel. This is for phase or delay, which you're probably not going to use that much. You've got panning here, but you can actually see your panning in different ways. I don't really use this panning right here. This little knob, this little, it's like a little joystick. This joystick is for surround sound. Then down here we have our dynamics for our compressor, and you can see the compressor, each one of these has its own little thing that it controls. We also have a gate. So if you want to turn the compressor on for that channel, you push the on button, or if you want to turn on the gate for that channel, you push the gate on button. Then you can switch between which one you're actually controlling with this little button right here, and it illuminates a light here, and you can control it using the knobs there. Of course, this does mean that you need to know how, like what the different functions of a compressor or a gate are, which we will talk about in more detail later. Then you also have an EQ. These are fully parametric, just like with the Audient, mid, high, mid, and low, mid. And then you have the low, which is also fully parametric in the high, but these also have a shelf. So they can be, they're kind of a combination. They can be it's a shelf or it's a Q. It can be a couple different things. So depending on how a shelf or a low cut or a high cut, something like that. So you can have a couple different settings for these depending on where you adjust the knob there. And I'll show you that once we can see it on screen. And that's it, pretty much. You know, the EQ is on by default. If you want to make adjustments to the EQ, you can. Of course, you just adjust the knobs here. You got a frequency knob, which also doubles as the Q, which adjusts your bandwidth. And then you've got your gain knob to adjust the gain of that EQ setting, that kind of set. And that's it. I mean, it's really not super, super hard, especially if you understand compression and gates and EQs. It's just a matter of, it's not that it's hard, it's that what happens is people oftentimes forget to look at that layer button or to push that select button. So you'll be sitting there turning knobs and you'll be like, I don't hear anything. And the reason why you don't hear anything is because you're adjusting the wrong channel. That's like 99% of the problems that people have, is that they just are moving too fast and they forget to look and they forget to push that button. So you got to make sure you stop, look, and before you do stuff. Okay. Down here we have user-defined keys. I actually never use these, so you can use those to set up different things on the console. I don't ever use them. And then you have your scene memory here, which is your overall settings for the board. 0, 0 is our zeroing out the board. So whenever you're done with your session, just go back to 0, 0, hit recall, and you'll be good to go. My advice is also, whenever you're starting a new session, zero it out. And whenever you get stuck, if you ever get to a place where you're just like, I do not know what's going on right now, something's happened, I'm not hearing any sound, or something's not working right, then what should you do? Zero out the board and start over again, because it probably means that you got yourself into kind of a weird situation. Now, speaking of weird situations, one other thing that I recommend, since we're here talking about this stuff, is that I recommend that you do not go into trying to set up your input patching or your setup, all that stuff, output patching. Please don't go in and mess with that stuff, because that is not recalled with the memory here. If you make changes to the overall routing of the board, you're messing it up for yourself and you're messing it up for everybody else. So when in doubt, don't just start mashing buttons on this thing. It's not that you're going to break it, but you could break how we have it set up, which would be kind of annoying for everybody involved, because that means that someone has to come along and reset the board. Awesome. All right, and that is the overview of the top of the board and kind of brief little bit about how it works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the screen recording right now.